Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I extend to you a very warm welcome for this festive event celebrating Europe Day 2024 with a special focus on enlargement and in particular how to best connect past with our future. My name is Wolfgang Bogensberger. I am the acting head of the Commission representation in Austria. On 19th March, this house of the European Union was targeted in an attack with red paint, seemingly motivated by the ongoing war in the Middle East. On the same day, a car in the convoy of the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, was also targeted with red paint during her visit to Vienna. We were deeply disturbed to learn that another color attack occurred yesterday, this time targeting individuals. Specifically you, dear Minister Edtstadler, and the President of the Israeli religious community, as you both were entering the building of the Third European Conference on Antisemitism. Yesterday's attack, which appeared to have anti-Semitic motive, is wholly unacceptable. Minister, please know that we unequivocally condemn this attack to the strongest terms. While the paint attack, luckily, did not physically harm you, it sends a troubling message that we all must remain vigilant and not allow extremists of any kind to resort to violence for political purposes. We must not tolerate such actions, as you emphasized yesterday, and we stand in full agreement to that with you. Minister Edtstadler, we greatly appreciate your presence here today as our keynote speaker. Next to you, I would like to extend a warm welcome to the esteemed panelists joining us here for this today's event. From Moldova, Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration of Moldova, Cristina Gherasimov. From Slovenia, former Chief Advisor to the Slovenian Government on financial aspects of the accession of Slovenia to the EU, Mojmir Mrak. From Czechia, former EU Commissioner, Vice President of the European Parliament and Chief Negotiator for the accession of the Czech Republic to the EU, Pavel Telička. And from Montenegro, Chief Negotiator of Montenegro with the EU, Predrag Cenovic. And last but not least, political scientist and professor at the Carinthia University of Applied Science, Karin Stainer-Hämmerle. We deeply appreciate your efforts coming to Vienna for this special occasion. This panel discussion will be moderated by the esteemed journalist from the political weekly Profil, Shibon Getz. I also would like to express my gratitude to the members of the Diplomatic Corps, particularly the representatives of the 10 member states celebrating the day today. I would like to extend a warm welcome as well to the ambassador of the Belgian presidency of the Council. Welcome. As well to all the representatives from all the other EU member states and candidate countries. Be more than welcome today. A special welcome as well to the students from Carinthia and to all attendees who have joined us in today's celebration. A few months ago, prompted by our colleagues from Slovenia and Czechia, we began discussions on organizing a special event to highlight the significance of EU enlargement, marking the 20th anniversary of the membership of these 10 countries. We also thought about how to use this occasion to have a more extended discussion on the enlargement policy of the European Union as a whole. We want to delve into the impact of enlargement, both for old and new member states, and for the entire European Union, and in that both looking into the past, into the present, and developing some perspective as well for the near future. We will review the events 20 years ago, when our European family expanded by joining of Cyprus, Czechia, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. They transformed the European Union into a larger political, economical, and cultural entity, spanning from Dublin to Nicosia, from Valletta to Stockholm, from Tallinn to Lisbon. The subsequent accession of Bulgaria and Romania and Croatia further strengthened our union. The pace of change across the European Union in the past 2 decades has been remarkable, with 450 million Europeans enjoying freedom of movement across a larger union. Citizens have gained stronger rights and freedoms, while democracy and the rule of law have been bolstered. Opportunities for individuals and businesses have flourished. We also aim to highlight Austrian perspectives in that context, as at that time already established member state, Austria played a pivotal role in this enlargement process. Austria will soon commemorate its 30th anniversary of its pro-European Union accession referendum in 1994, which paved the way for Austria's accession in 1995. Looking ahead, we seek to bridge the European past with the future, anticipating another significant round of enlargement in the coming years that will expand and fortify our European Union with more than 30 member states. What can the current candidate countries expect? How can they benefit from the past experiences? There are several pertinent issues that warrant detailed examination. Following the panel discussion, all 10 member states celebrating took the opportunity to showcase themselves in the best light by offering delicious specialties from their respective countries. The country-specific tables outside this room are already beautifully arranged. The food appears appetizing, and of course, the original Czech beer is a standout highlight. But before we delve into the culinary delights, I would like to begin with a joint video message commemorating the historic EU enlargement of 2004, featuring the ambassadors of the 10 respective countries. Please. By joining the European Union, member states commit to the values of the European Union. The fundamental rights of the European Union are an essential part of these values. Those 10 countries that have joined the European Union on 1st May 2004 will now present some highly important fundamental rights.
Článek 1. Lidská důstojnost je nedotknutelná. Musí být respektována a chráněna.
Artikkel 2. Igaühel on õigus elule. Kedagi ei tohi surma mõista ega hukata.
Άρθρο 6. Κάθε πρόσωπο έχει το δικαίωμα στην ελευθερία και ασφαλεία.
10. pants. Ikvienam ir tiesības uz domu, pārliecības un ticības brīvību.
11 straipsnis. Kiekvienas turi teisę į saviraiškos laisvę. Ši teisė apima laisvę turėti savo įsitikinimus, gauti bei skleisti informaciją ir idėjas, valdžios institucijoms nekliudant ir nepaisant valstybių sienų.
20. cikk. A törvény előtt mindenki egyenlő.
Artikolu 21. Kwalunkwe diskriminazzjoni ibbażata fuq kull raġuni bħal sess, razza, kulur, oriġini etnika jew soċjali, karatteristiċi ġenetiċi, lingwa, reliġjon jew twemmin, opinjoni politika jew kwalunkwe opinjoni oħra, sħubija f'minoranza nazzjonali, proprjetà, twelid, diżabilità, età jew orjentazzjoni sessuali għandha tkun ipprojbita.
Artykuł 22. Unia szanuje różnorodność kulturową, religijną i językową.
Člen 23. Enakost žensk in moških se mora zagotoviti na vseh področjih, vključno z zaposlovanjem, delom in plačilom za delo.
Článok 45. Každý občan Únie má právo na slobodný pohyb a pobyt na území členských štátov.
With that little warm-up, I would now like to invite Federal Minister for the EU and Constitution of Austria, Caroline and Edtstadler, to deliver the keynote speech for this event. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Acting Head of the Representation of the European Commission, Wolfgang Bogensberger. Thanks for the invitation on this occasion, but thanks also for your introduction, your warm words, and also thanks for mentioning yesterday's attack. It was not only an attack personally to me, and I always say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I mean it like that, but it was an attack also on our values, and I think it's very important to emphasize at the beginning of a celebration like today's that we will fight for our values, that we will never give up, and that we will show the world that the generations before us fought for it really hard, and we stand clear on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Dear Deputy Prime Minister of Moldova, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure for me and an honor to be here with you today on this joyous occasion. My heartfelt congratulations to all the people from Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Poland, Malta, Cyprus, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. I know the ambassador already mentioned all the names, but I think we have to name them again and again, because 20 years of EU membership, after the biggest accession process the European Union has seen so far, is worth mentioning several times, especially here in this room, in this house of the European Commission in Austria. It was on the 1st of May. I think everyone has its own memories on these days. And thanks to you, the European Union and the voice of the European Union is much stronger today than it was 20 years ago. We had a very strong neighborhood to countries surrounding Austria already before, but now we are also strong partners within the European Union. And only last week I had also the opportunity to celebrate together with Slovakia on this occasion in Bratislava. By the way, the two capitals of the European Union were very close together, and no two capitals are closer than Vienna and Bratislava. I think this is also worth mentioning. In Austria, we also celebrate an anniversary this year, the 30th year of the conclusion of Austria's EU accession negotiations and the referendum on the European Union in 1994. On the 12th of June, 66.6% of the people of Austria voted yes for a membership in the European Union, and we are really proud of that till today. These occasions offer a good opportunity to look back and also to take stock of what has been happened in the last years. Despite all the sometimes justified criticism, and I would say the needed criticism to get better, I think we should remember two things. First of all, who is the European Union? The European Union are we. We, the 27 member states, represented in all the different institutions on the European level. And we have to be very clear. All of us have benefited from the EU membership over the past decades. This is most evident in two areas. In the area of security, which is more important than ever before, and in the area of prosperity. On security, the EU has been both a guarantor and a driver for peace in Europe. And yes, I say that also knowing that we have a very crucial moment in history since the Russian war of aggression towards Ukraine. But the idea of making a union and making it materially impossible to have war against each other is still the basis of the European Union's founders' idea. And I think since February 2020, it is clear also for younger people, also like me, who did not have in mind war at the European continent, that it is not naturally given that we can live peacefully here on the European continent. A look at our neighborhood torn by conflicts and crises should remind us on that every day. And it's worth fighting for peace in these regions, but also here in the European Union, and to keep up the life like we know it. On prosperity, the EU has the largest single market in the world, and we all benefited from it. We can live, study, work, do our business wherever in the European Union. There is no roaming fees and nearly the same currency in every member state of the European Union. I think we are getting there slowly, because there is also one candidate country, Montenegro, who has the euro already now, and I really do hope that we can enlarge also the euro system in this regard. Austria especially is an export country. 70% of our foreign trade takes place within the European Union, and we export a lot to other member states. When we look at the export rate, when we joined the European Union, then we can say that this number is 4 times higher today than it was 30 years ago. And also, likewise, other countries have strongly benefited from this European largest single market and extremely well performed in the last years. Well, these advantages are no ideological claims, but concrete facts. And we should be aware of these facts. This does not come at the expense of our national identities. We are united in diversity. And yesterday I could meet pupils who are doing an apprenticeship at the SPA. They're a European school. They got also the plate yesterday. And we saw products from all the 27 member states. And it's naturally for us to buy salami from Hungary or some good wine from Spain or elsewhere, even if we do really have good wine here in Austria. But you don't want to have the same wine every day. So it's good to have this united in diversity motto of the European Union and do it in the single market. We can really live it on a daily basis. Well, looking ahead at the European election in June, we have to remind ourselves, if you are not part of the European Union, you can't have a saying. And this is what I try to deliver also to people here in Austria, especially to young people, to pupils who are allowed to vote at the age of 16. They have to participate in the elections of the European Parliament, because it's important who will sit there, and it's also important, if I take the example from Austria, that these 2 deputies from Austria will stick together and work for their countries, but also in cooperation with the other member states of the European Union. Being part of it is essential, and the challenges we are facing, the crisis, also the war, are international ones. No matter if you're talking about the Russian war of aggression to Ukraine, the crisis in the Middle East, the fight against illegal migration, the climate crisis or inflation. We can only tackle these issues together. And we need common answers at the European Union level. The recourse to purely national solutions by some right-standing parties, it's an empty promise without success. Did you ever hear some solutions from them? Did you ever get some answers? But this is exactly what the people are waiting from us. They expect answers, they expect solutions for these big challenges. And against this backdrop, we have to deliver on these big challenges that lie ahead of us. And I just want to name 4 of them. The fight against illegal migration. I think we are on a good path. There was the conclusion on the Pact on Migration and Asylum. It's in its last minutes to be concluded and then adopted. And I think this is important because it sends a message out of the European Union. We are working together, we have one solution for that, and we are communicating by one voice. The second area is security and defense. As I already mentioned, I'm a child of peace. And for me, it was shocking when I saw the pictures, and I remember quite well back in February 2020 what happened there and what is still happening there on a daily basis. But that means also that we have to react. We have to invest more in military services, and we have to work together. And I think the strategic compact is something which was completed and concluded quickly after this horrifying situation started in Ukraine. And this can also be done by respecting the neutrality, and some other countries of the European Union have the status of neutrality. This is something we can do even if we are working together, living our neutrality. And the third point is competitiveness. We have to further develop our single market. I think it's a big effort that we do have the single market, but now it's the time to reduce the obstacles for our economies, for our companies. And we should really have a booster through the single market and not a break. And that is why I, together with the Minister for Economy and Labour, we developed a 10-points plan, which I presented not only in Austria, together with the Minister Martin Kocher, but also in Brussels. And there were 10 member states speaking out loudly that this is the right way to go. Let's reduce the bureaucratic burdens for our companies, and let's really see that it is the best thing we can make out of this very attractive single market, also be seen worldwide and geopolitically. And the fourth point I would like to mention is enlargement. Austria developed the concept of the gradual integration. And I'm quite proud that in the meantime also the Commission took not only the word but the model and the idea behind in nearly all its documents when we are talking about enlargement. We should really show concrete benefits for the candidate countries in exchange to reforms, because it's not easy to do these reforms in the several countries. And I have very often been already to the Western Balkan countries. It's hard to do a justice reform. It's hard to have a vetting process, but it's necessary. And we have to give the politicians their arguments why they are still doing them and why they are so committed to the law of the European Union also. The enlargement should be used as a geopolitical tool, because it's very important to name also one thing. It's a question of security for the European Union, and it's a question of credibility of the European Union, if we can deliver also things and if we can keep our promises for the enlargement countries, for the candidate countries. One thing must be clear. There can't be 2 classes of candidate countries. And of course, there are no fast-track procedures. They have to do the reforms. We can only support and help them and keep our promises. And if we are doing so, we already did more than we did in the last years, I would say. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, this is really a great moment in history. It's a celebrating day for at least 10 member states, but I would say also for the whole European Union. I can only congratulate you. It's good to have you in the family. I think we should enlarge our family. And I would like to conclude with a quote by the former Chancellor of the Republic of Austria, Wolfgang. He mentioned it, I think, nearly 3 years ago when I had a celebration meeting also at the Austrian Chancellery, and it was before the war in Ukraine started. It was before we saw the crisis in the Middle East, but already then, and he's really a wise man, he said, I quote, "If the European Union didn't exist already, we would have to invent it exactly now." Thank you so much, and thanks for being together.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us on this day of celebration. I'm Siobhan Geets, and I'm going to have the great honor to lead the debate here today, this morning. So I think we've been introduced. I will just introduce you a little more in the first round of questions. What I would like to find out now, I would like to try to take a look behind the scenes, go back in time and see what do accession talks actually look like. We can't be there. They're behind closed doors. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Mrak. You were, back then, you advised your government, Slovenian government, on the accession to the European Union. How did these talks actually work? I mean, it's pretty much a success story. Accession was quite fast. Can you remember what were the obstacles? Were there challenges? Was there a moment in time when everything was in doubt, or can you remember?
Well, first of all,
I think it's working.
It's working. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation to be here on this panel. I entered into our accession negotiations with experience from other negotiations. Slovenia was a country which became independent state in '91. And one of the issues we had to put in place first was to put the country, let's say, independent in political and then in economic terms. So my first negotiations, to say, were basically negotiations how to put Slovenia independent in financial terms with all the creditors. The country which we were coming from was a defaulted country. So to start living normally, we had to put in place normal relationships with foreign creditors. Why I'm mentioning this? Because these were the negotiations which were completely different than the one I was then later on involved for the EU accession negotiations. While those negotiations were much more negotiations about, let's say, negative things, how to take over, a relatively small proportion of debt. And negotiating about the debt is not something what is very popular for a negotiator. While negotiating for the EU accession was negotiating on something what we were basically dreaming of. I remember in the times of former Yugoslavia, the end of the former Yugoslavia, one of the major slogans in Slovenia was Europe now. So, but it was clear to us that if we want to get into the Europe, what means, of course, European Union, in that circumstances, we had first to become independent, that we will be able to independently then start to decide what we would like to do and to join. So what you mentioned is, you are right, we were spending the first 5 years of our independence more or less putting our country as a sovereign state. And we were really catching up the EU accession negotiations in the very last moment when I'm talking for the first group of the acceding country. This is so-called Luxembourg group, because they were, if you remember, 12 countries negotiating, 6 plus 6. One of them started in '98, another one then a year later. So we did catch up to the first one. And these negotiations are, in our case, were really negotiations for which we had a very full political consensus, what was very important for us, if you want, negotiators, because also the structure of the negotiating team was done then in these lines. It is interesting to note that in Slovenia, the negotiating team remained unchanged throughout the negotiations, even though we had some changes in the governments, which were not just marginal, but I would say major changes, but the team remained unchanged. And I can tell you this was one thing which strengthened credibility of the negotiating team in Brussels, because it was clear if you are that much in contact with these counterparts and you are there continuously, then there is certain relationship established of trust. I'm not saying of other things, but of trust. So if you say something that we cannot deliver this, that this is not acceptable, it's taken much more seriously if you are in contact with somebody for 3 years than if you are in contact with them for the first time. So that's where these issues. But otherwise, I would say the EU accession negotiations for us were really the period we often said that this was the process of speeding up transition, and I really mean it. In our case, talking about today, it's a little bit differently, but at that time, that was a very powerful instrument for speeding up those things which we would have to do anyway in many areas. The negotiations were, let's say, relatively smooth. Also in Slovenia, we had a specific situation that because of our arrangements, I think we were the only country which was putting the negotiating positions to the decisions of the parliament, of course, to the Committee for European Affairs. So that's created to us negotiators sometimes some headaches because of the time consumed for this. But on the other side, it again improved the knowledge of what is going on in the country. So when you were then looking for the Eurostat, not analysis, this what is being doing reviews every Europolls. It was clear that from these polls it was seen that the people in Slovenia were much more knowing what is going on the negotiations than in the other candidate countries of those times. Of course, these were the negotiations in the convoy with pluses and minuses of a convoy. Sometimes I would be much more happy that really the accession would go much more on the merit basis. But as I said, there are plus and minuses. What was plus on that side is that there was a very clear commitment on the EU member states at that time that also they would like to finish the accession relatively quickly because of economic, political interests. But if I compare today's negotiations, we have now another convoy. One common characteristic, which I think we maybe can discuss later on, is that a precondition for enlargement of this kind of a convoy was first internal preparation within the EU. If we go back, the EU internally prepared for our accession with the Nice Treaty. The Nice Treaty has basically paved the way for institutional things which are necessary for us to join. And I think now I do not believe that the accession of new candidate countries, particularly if this would be as a group, is possible without first changing some things internally.
Yes, very, very important topic that we're going to get back to a little bit later. I want to, also we have two representatives of two member states who are not yet part of the European Union, but I want to stay with the topic of how the accession talks actually worked in a big success story. For the next question, Mr. Telička, you actually led the negotiations of your country with the European Union, Czech Republic. Can you give us an impression? You were sitting there behind closed doors in Brussels. What comes to mind? Is there a situation that you think of now? What comes to mind first?
Well, first of all, good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation. It's very pleasant to be not just here in the European Union House on this anniversary, but for me it's also nice to be in Vienna, I must admit. After long years, I managed to walk around Vienna a bit, and I just really felt like home. Anyway, nostalgia part, you have asked about the challenges, and of course I will also address the negotiations themselves, but maybe let me start by something that may sound to as a paradox. Czechoslovakia at the time declared the intention to join the European communities. So the goal was set. It was set on basically just a few days, maybe a week or two after the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic, in Czechoslovakia, including the Czech Republic then. And I think the first person that said that was, in fact, Václav Havel. The paradox is that we declared a goal and we knew nothing, honestly, nothing or very little about the community of which we wanted to be a part of. That by itself was a challenge. Yeah? A paradox, yes, but I agree with my Slovenian colleague that accession as such, membership, but also the process before, served as an accelerator of the reforms and the transition which was yet to come. This is how many people felt it, saw it. I think that Václav Havel and a few others, when they said return to Europe, and he was heavily criticized for having said that because everyone said, but we were in Europe, always, historically. But the point was different. Europe has changed since we were isolated for 4 decades. So for us, the first challenge was learning to know what the European communities are about. What is it that we are going to be a part of? Secondly, of course, was to make sure that the transition goes in the right direction, so that we can accelerate it, but also that we do comply with the future obligations. You have to do it from the very early days. You can't just transform a certain sector, part of the economy, or enact legislation and then say, oh, we got it wrong because the EU legislation is about something different or stipulates other obligations. You can then do the same thing, the same process twice. So I think that that was also key to understand the implications for you and therefore see what the issues for negotiations will be about. If I said that it was a learning process for us, well, let's face it and let's be honest, maybe politically incorrect, it was also a learning process for the European communities. What did the member states of that time really know about the new candidate countries, those that were to join? I remember a very impressive French diplomat at that time, Deputy Secretary of the Council, Pierre de Boissier, basically saying vis-à-vis some candidate countries, I will be politically correct for a moment, I won't mention which ones, but he said, yeah, but who are they? I said, Pierre, come on. And he was in this amusing, slightly arrogant way saying one thing: we don't know what the European policies of those member states will be about. And he was dead right. This was yet to happen. You asked me about the negotiations. Of course, we had to build up a political consensus. We had to maintain it. We had to. I wanted to have a great team, a narrow team, a team of experts, quite independent on the ministries, a team that would survive. We, of course, like Slovenia, had to go to the parliament, to the committees, but we also went to the tripartite. We wanted to have the economic social partners aware. But we had to build the consensus on both sides. Yeah, and I think that it was not always easy. I mean, let's not pretend that every single member state, every single politician, every single diplomat was enthusiastic about the fact that the EU will enlarge. Many felt well in a club of 12. And honestly, I don't blame a single opinion of that kind. But that is something that we really had to build. And about the negotiations, I'll finish here in order not to speak long. We'll have more opportunities later on. But if you ask me about the negotiations, it's also fair to say that we wanted to really negotiate also in order to maintain the support, the enthusiasm, and also the willingness and the support of the political representation. But honestly, the first rounds of negotiations were nothing that you would call negotiations. Yeah, it was just, you came, maybe I'll finish with one story. Under the Portuguese presidency, you come to the negotiating round and you open the new chapters. And so the Portuguese ambassador, as the negotiator during the Portuguese presidency, read out the position on all 3 chapters of the day. Well, so I responded, and he expected me that I would read out I didn't read, I never read the positions, but I would speak out on our positions on all 3 chapters. But I did only one, and then I said to Mr. Co-Chair, I return the floor to you because I would appreciate a few comments from your side and answers, and how do you see the points that I have raised? It was a shock because it was not in the scenario. Yeah, it was not in the notes. There was no expectation that I would finish out after the first chapter. So like 90 seconds of silence, people running around, and then he would say what usually was to be said. We will have to return to that chapter at a later stage. So after the second chapter, I did the same. The progress was that it didn't last a minute and a half. It was like 30 seconds. The answer was the same. After the third chapter, I said, Mr. Co-Chair, am I right to assume that you have nothing to say, but we will have to return to that chapter at a later stage? He said, yes. So next week, there was this European Voice weekly There was a one-page article about the Czech negotiator sometimes going as far as humiliating his counterparts. Well, it was not a humiliation. It was one of the ways how we, our Slovenian colleagues, Hungarian, Polish, and so on, in different ways, try to really speed up the process. But obviously, at a certain point, we really started negotiations or essential issues for us, for the EU, for our citizens, companies. And as I told you, Deputy Prime Minister, this morning, at the end of the day, it was really good fun. We really enjoyed it, and I think it is, with all the deficiencies, a success story, and I hope that these countries will build on that in the future.
Maybe just briefly, can both of you explain briefly how many people sit at the negotiation table once there's real negotiations? Who's there? How long does it take? Is there a limit to?
I think we should really, what was said, I mean, let's be frank. Negotiations is not an appropriate term for the process. In my view, the appropriate term would be approximation. You are basically joining the rules of the game which were established, which is logical. If you would like to join a club, then of course you have to respect the rules. What is really the subject of the negotiations is then to what extent all those rules will be implemented immediately when you join, and you do have certain areas where also the partners on the other side were aware that they simply cannot be implemented immediately for different reasons. So what was really the subject of the negotiations were the so-called transition periods. And let's be frank here, no, fair here. We did not have in our negotiations just transition periods requested by the candidate countries. Also the member states wanted some transition periods. I remember at the very end, we had a very, how would they say, unpleasant discussions about the free movement of labor. You know, we were joining in 2 years after the EU membership, Euro area. And for the first 3 years in the Euro area, we still did not have free movement of labor because it was requested at the time that a transition period for I don't know how many years was for the free movement of labor. Which was 7 years, so it's not that important. But the point is that these were the negotiations on both sides. In terms of the number, I think these were more or less then the negotiations going according to the chapters. I would say the only serious exception was there the final round of negotiations, the financial package. Then, of course, this is then the more horizontal type. Countries were differently organized, but usually this segment, which was how you will transpose the legislation, was done on the chapter level. One more thing here is, which is, I think, again, a difference between today's negotiations and the negotiations we had. That's at least my sense. At that time, the Commission had a much stronger position in the negotiations. So when you did negotiate with the counterpart on the Commission side, you were pretty sure that what you will be able to agree with the Commission, that what you will be able to, let's say, sell to the Commission, to argue with the Commission, that the Commission will be able to sell this to the member states. Today, this is not the case. So today, the candidate countries are much more in a situation that they have to negotiate directly with the member states, and that's a messy process. If you have 27 countries, that's much more difficult to control if you want. That's the overall speed.
I'm going to get back to that in a minute. I just want to ask Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle, you're a political scientist at Carinthia University. Most Austrians know you from TV and radio with your analysis. Could you give us a brief overview of how Austria, a country that was always very much open to enlargement, how did we benefit? How did the country benefit from the last enlargements?
Yes, also welcome from my side, and thank you for having me here. I have no experience with negotiations, so I cannot tell you some stories about that, but I would like to add the public opinion also a little bit in Austria at that time and nowadays, of course. And Minister Edtstadler, she mentioned already some benefits Austria gained from the enlargement 2004. And of course, I think we should not forget also the enlargements 2007 with Romania and Bulgaria. and of course also with Croatia 2013. Yes, you mentioned already I'm not an economist, I'm a political scientist, but I would like to add some figures and facts also of the economic perspective and also, of course, of what happened in Austria. So, I mean, it's obvious we are a relatively small country, and we benefited greatly from the access to a larger market. I think about 70 million more consumers joined the European Union in 2004. And I just can reproduce some facts that economists calculated. But for example, the Austrian Institute for Economic Research, the WIFO, they calculated that the expansion of the trade opportunities only for Austria was about additional economic growth of almost 20 billion euros and the creation, of course, of around 130,000 additional jobs. So they said the gross domestic product was, yes, they say that it have grown by an additional 0.7% per year, so that is more or less 15.6 more growth for Austria. And also the export was really important for us, so the exports to 5 member states only. At that time, Hungary, Slovenia, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Poland have tripled from 2003 to around 30 billion euros in 2023, so in this 20 years. And of course, before the enlargement, Austria, we have close ties to that countries. Historically, I think it's very clear. But we were also, before the enlargement, one of the top investors, direct investments in that region. And if you were there, you could see Austrian banks, you can see Austrian insurance companies really on the street. They were visible everywhere. And of course, there were also warnings from the cheap labor, from the influx of cheap labor. The transition period in Austria was till 2011. So I think we had the longest one. And then 2011, 88,500 people worked here from Romania, Bulgaria, and Croatia. They came later, but 88,500 people were working here from the 10 EU countries. And 2023, the figure had risen to 266,000 people. So it's much more, of course, of people being here, but the unemployment rate hadn't risen really at the long term. So I think it's also very important to understand that these integration helped us to overcome all the negative effects of demographic change in Austria.
And so the fearmongers were wrong, because I remember it's always a bit of the fear that some right-wing parties put out there is, we're going to have unemployment, we're going to be flooded by cheap labor, by cheap workers. So we benefited too. I think it's a very important point to make, that enlargement is not only to include new countries for their own sakes, but for everyone. Yes. And Austria is a little bit special because we benefited even more than...
We benefited even more, but this is also a great contradiction. We are most skeptical against new enlargement and about the European Union in general. But as a political scientist, I just wanted to emphasize also the other reasons, of course, because strengthening young democracies, I think, was always also very important for the European Union. We did this in the 1980s with Greece, with Portugal and Spain. And I think for me, as a political scientist, this is really a good reason to enlarge the European Union. And in the meantime, also Minister Edtstadler mentioned it, the security policy is, of course, very important for us. I think we are a small country. we are a neutral country, and how can we feel safe in future also? And this is because now we are surrounded by member states of the European Union and, of course, also of NATO states. And this was going hand in hand also at that time. Most of the countries, they tried to join both communities at the millennium. Yes, and then, of course, we have to be part of a big, major power. That's better, and to have some say in that. So just the public opinion at that time in Austria wasn't for the enlargement, I must say. In Austria, there was only a majority in favor of Hungary with 60% and in favor of Slovenia with 56%. So that's a majority, but not the biggest one. And the important thing I would like to end in the first round is that it was economically, it was a success. We benefited most. But it wasn't a political success. We had 2/3 of the Austrians, they said 30 years ago, they said yes to the European Union. But at the last Eurobarometer, only 42% of the Austrians have a positive view of the EU membership. So this isn't, I think it's not the only reason that the EU is too large or they want to have new member states, but we were at the end of the list of all EU member countries. And so I must say, yes, we benefited the most, I think, of this enlargement, but now we have a population here in Austria that is more opposed to the European Union than in any other member state. And I'm sorry that Caroline Edtstadler is not with us anymore, but I think what we have to say is that national political elites, they did a lot of things wrong by communicating the positive effects of the European Union here in Austria to the own electorate and to the people.
I mean, that's usually a problem, isn't it? When you come back from Brussels, the chancellors or the heads of states get back from Brussels, and the narrative is usually, well, we did this for you, and it's due to us that we have this now, or we got rid of the worst, and that is due to us again. Is this perception, this narrative, starker in Austria than it is in other countries? Is that maybe a reason why the perception is so bad?
I mean, it's strong enough in Austria. I don't know how the politicians are communicating when they're coming back from Brussels in other countries. But I just want to remember the position of Austria to the enlargement also of the Schengen zone with Romania and Bulgaria. And I think we have no solution because of Austria, not only Austria probably, but Austria was one really important player. And this is always a national sensitivity and also a party political position. And yes, the European Union is always the scapegoat for things that are going wrong. And of course, that's a failure probably of the institutions. Every political decision maker has to go back in his own country and to be re-elected or to get the job again. It's always on a national basis, and of course then if you want to be re-elected you have to put national politics on the first place.
Maybe one quick reply, Mr. Telička, but then we have to get...
Yeah, just was going to say that I don't think that Austria is exceptional in this respect. Maybe the figures are worse, but I think the problem that we have today in the European Union, and it's not a question of European Union only, we have crisis of politics. We don't have political leaders that have visions, that have political courage to deliver on issues which are difficult, sensitive. Why did enlargement happen? Why did it happen already in 2004? There were some political leaders that had the guts, had the vision, and they were able to go against the people meters, against what the polls showed. Because not just Austria had low figures, there were other member states. Some were already at that time calculating with a referendum and so on. So I think that this is what we lack. It is a problem that has been with us. It is also a lack of ability to communicate, not when the problem is being decided and solved or not solved, but when it comes, to draw the public into the process, to have a public debate, to have a political debate. And this is, in fact, not taking place. And yes, the EU for many is a scapegoat. So we go to the EU today to defend our interests. We managed to achieve this. We did not fail. And if there is a problem, it's the European Union to be blamed for it. While I would expect the ability to see the problems, see that they are common, seek common solutions and fight it, even if it is painful domestically. You can succeed in domestic politics let's say, on a longer time scale if you have these abilities and such a performance. Otherwise, it's just a snowball which you are pushing in front of you, gets bigger and bigger, and one day you will get stuck.
So it's maybe a lack of narrative, of a positive narrative. We might get back to this later. I do want to debate this a little bit later. I just want to get to the candidates now because you haven't said anything so far. And I'm really interested in your points of view. So, Gherasimov, you are the chief negotiator of your country, Montenegro. The negotiation talks have been going on for a while. They started in 2012. So, well, yeah, almost 12 years now. There's different times flying around there. The optimistic people say you might be able to join in 25. You yourself said once, no, maybe more like 28. So what is the perspective here? What's realistic? That would be the first question. And the second question, so I found that very interesting, how it was said, we heard earlier that the negotiations are more with the member states today than they are with the Commission. Maybe you can elaborate on that too?
First of all, let me thank you for having me here. I would like to greet the audience and to say that it's a good place to be. It's good to be in Vienna for many reasons. I mean, we are celebrating important historical dates. It's 200 years of famous Beethoven Symphony, but also 20 years of a very important enlargement. That crossed one of the lines that existed for centuries in one or the other way in Europe, and somehow are the fulfillment of a big dream that existed in Central Europe for centuries. So, in my view, it's way more big and more important than something with what we could put in 20 years. Coming back to your question, yes, I was appointed as chief negotiator of Montenegro something over 4 months ago. Before that, I was also in academia. I'm also a professor of political science. And yes, as you said, Montenegro started negotiations in 2012. So it's a long period, but my point would be that despite many changes in negotiating structure that Montenegro has made, the dynamics is very dependent on two important things, because negotiations as such, they have at least two layers. One is political, and it means that negotiations depend pretty much on the political will in Brussels, but also in 27 capitals, but also in Montenegro. So this political dynamics is very important. And on the other side, there is a whole layer of technical aspect of negotiation. So these are two segments that must fit both of them in order for negotiations to go smoothly. On the other side, you're negotiating with Brussels, meaning with Commission, who is usually very friendly, not usually, always very friendly to the candidate, helping and really arranging the best possible setting for the negotiations. But if the other lines of communication with the capitals, so meaning with the member states, are not functioning well, the process can get in a very wrong direction. So in that regard, I also have to say that the time is crucial, but the time is also very relative when it comes to negotiations. So we had several years of negotiations in which basically nothing was going on. And then now we have 6 months of super intensive negotiations with the European Commission. Of course, they're not negotiations, as you said, they're not truly negotiations, or at least we can call them asymmetrical negotiations, in which, of course, one side is obviously telling you what you're supposed to do, which is fair enough. You're joining the club, so the rules are there. You're supposed to approximate your system, your legal system, to the European acquis, which is really an impressive legal structure, probably unseen in the history of this civilization. So in that regard, in the last six months, we had very intensive communication with the European Commission, which is meaning daily. And as you know, the new methodology, which was set a couple of years ago, says that in order to continue with closing the so-called technical chapters, you need to fulfill the interim benchmarks from chapters 23 and 24. So rule of law first. So you start with the rule of law and you end the process with the rule of law. So in that regard, Montenegro is now in front of a very important, I would say, historical moment in its negotiation process, because in June, we're expecting to get positive EBAR for both chapters 23 and 24. And that's exactly what we've been doing the last 6 months. And then, of course, once we get EBAR, and we truly hope that this will happen, because basically all institutions have done pretty much everything what they could in order to fulfill all the interim benchmarks. Once it's done, we will restart the whole negotiation process for the other technical chapters.
What do you think of the time perspective? Maybe you just give I know it's very hard to tell because we don't know what's going to happen.
The foreseeing of the dates is really something we would like to avoid. But this government has set 2028, so Montenegro to become the 28th member in the year 2028, and I think it's achievable. I think if we follow these dynamics of negotiation, this is something that could take place. Madam Minister, when she visited Montenegro, she was talking about 2027. So we also have some even more optimistic prospects. But I would say 2028 would be the year in which Montenegro could successfully fulfill all the closing benchmarks within the chapters, and of course allow for the time that is necessary for the member countries to express their willingness to accept Montenegro in the European Union.
Maybe just briefly, in order to explain this, because you said it was important to have a line to the capital. So all the member states, of course, need to agree to the enlargement. Mm-hmm. It can be vetoed any time. Mr. Mrak, you wanted to reply?
No, not to reply, but just one comment. What was mentioned here, these negotiations are really quite different. Few respects. One was mentioned at the time when we were negotiating. There was no formal interim and final benchmarks. There was no. So this was a different process. So you see a much more structured process here. Another thing. I think now, that was already the case in the case of Croatia, and I think that was a little bit based on the experience of Romania and Bulgaria. There is a much stronger pressure now, not just to be adjusted in legal terms, approximation, but that what you have basically adjusted legally that you are able to implement. These are two completely different things. To change legislation is, of course, is necessary, important, but if you want to implement certain things, this is very often associated with problems related to the institutions. Sometimes you have to create new institutions, you need new people, you need new funding,
We have done some calculations for the last 5 years before the EU accession. The acquis-related accession costs are roughly somewhere between 0.1 and 0.5 and 1% of GDP. So you have additional pressure on public finances if you want to do this adjustment. And this is done before you accede to the countries. And the third thing is that this new methodology, 2020 methodology, is significantly changed in respect that you still have these 31 chapters. It's not that important. But before these chapters you had a very horizontal 35 chapters, and that was it. Now the chapters are linked into the clusters, and there is one, well, I would say kind of a deluxe cluster. So it's fundamentals, which will de facto determine the path of the EU accession negotiations. And here are all these most difficult things. We are talking about fundamentals, 23, 24, economic criterias. And if you do make a kind of not progress sufficient on the fundamentals, it may, the whole negotiations may stop. So I'm just trying to give you a sense. The negotiations have become much more structured. And then, of course, this is then the issue which then falls to the countries. And just one more comment about the years. We were also having this issue, you know, when. We were basically typically talking about when we will be internally ready to accede. These are two different things, because the accession you cannot control, because it's also on the other side, the member states. But when you plan to be internally ready, it means that you will transpose the legislation, that you will implement the legislation, and then, of course, with this, in this way, to put a kind of a pressure that you are ready, you know, you should also now be cooperative and bring us in. What will be now the structure in this enlarged convoy? That I think is still to be seen.
Yeah, yes, please.
Many times the word convoy was mentioned. So usually in the theories of integration we have convoy versus regatta. I think, of course, it's a matter of decision. It's a matter of political decision at the end of the approach, but also of the similarity between different political systems who are approaching the EU. But I think it's good that the EU is back on track with the idea of enlargement as important, or maybe one of the pillars of the foreign policy of the EU, but also restating the importance of meritocracy-based approach to enlargement. So in that regard, Montenegro is really a front runner in this process. So it's not important at the end if it's going to be a regatta or convoy, as long as it's always meritocracy-based accession.
Let's hear from Ms. Gherasimov. Your country is relatively new to the, well, kind of new to the game. You're part of the government of the Republic of Moldova. Can you tell us a little bit of what happened since last fall? And can you actually learn from these experiences? Are you trying to learn from the experience, from what we've heard now also from countries that are having talks for a longer time now, or are member states already?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, Moldova is the new kid on the block. We have applied for membership in February 2022. We got the candidate status last summer, and in very short term, meaning this December, we got green light from the member states to open accession talks with Moldova. And I will just take this opportunity to thank Austria, but also Czech and Slovenia for making this decision of the Council in December possible for my country. This has triggered a lot of processes at home, including the creation of my position 3 months ago, We didn't have a Deputy Prime Minister for European integration. We created a separate structure, a Bureau for European integration that will coordinate the efforts across the government institutions, other public agencies, but also coordinate or engage the efforts coming from civil society, from the private sector, from the academia in this whole effort. It's new for us, so we are indeed learning a lot from countries that are now undergoing the process still, like Montenegro. But we also had very good discussions this morning with Mr. Telička, with Professor Mrak here about their experiences and what we can learn about maneuvering better the waters of accession talks. I think what's important for us in the upcoming months is to have that first intergovernmental conference, which officially opens the accession talks with Moldova. At the same time, we're already undergoing the screening process, which basically means that the Commission is explaining to us what European legislation is about, and then we will come later with an explanation of how far we are from that European legislation that needs to be reflected in our own national legislation. So we very much look forward to the first intergovernmental conference, and also for what that would unlock for us in terms of starting the second phase of the screening. But this whole European agenda for Moldova really sits very well on three sets of challenges, and this is security, economy, and justice sector reform. I will not talk much about hard security issues, but in terms of promoting European integration process in Moldova, we need to have all the societies support. At this moment, we have a bit less than 70% support among our citizens, but at the same time, there is a very strong propaganda coming from Russia, where there is this attempt to associate European integration with war. So a very strong narrative that circulates in Moldova today is, look at what Ukraine got on its shoulders. They wanted European integration, they wanted NATO, and that's what they have. So this uncertainty, this disinformation and propaganda about the EU, what the EU values are, what the EU stands for, are meant to create uncertainty, fear among our population. And this is key because Moldova will hold a referendum in October on our pro-European course. So the stronger it gets, the more efforts the government needs to make to explain the European Union to the people, to explain what the benefits are. And our key message always has been that the European Union is a project for peace. It's the union that was meant to put conflicts aside among a community of member states that now cherish really the interests of their citizens at the core of the decision-making, not only in Brussels, but across the other EU capitals. On economy, we're very much looking forward to strengthen it. We have been hit hard by multiple economic crises, starting from the consequences of the pandemic, the energy blackmail from Russia. I will not mention the economic consequences of the war. It's a very difficult decision to take to come invest today in Moldova, and we're doing our best to create the right incentives for the private sector, both at home, but also for the foreign investors to come invest in Moldova. And the third challenge is a very difficult and complex reform of the justice sector that we have launched about a year ago. That means the We started the extraordinary evaluation of judges and prosecutors, where we try to clean up the justice from all of the corrupt practices and corrupt elements so that we can really put the basis of a strong rule of law, a very independent sector that will be able to defend everyone's interests only according to the law. And we are in the midst of this reform now. I think judges and prosecutors understood that we are serious about it, that it's not a joke. You've seen how difficult this process has been in Albania, but in time it has produced very good results. So we look forward to the same. But we are in the midst of a war with judges and prosecutors at home because they want to preserve the status quo, they want to continue with the same practices, and this makes the process much lengthier and much more difficult. At the same time, we're very optimistic that we are on the right track with the support of the 27 EU member states and beyond. I think we're getting ready for the moment when we will start the actual negotiations. We are strengthening our administrative capacity. We're also working with other countries, learning from their experience. So far, so good.
As you said, there's powerful forces inside and outside of the country who want to prevent Moldova from joining the European Union. Excuse me. And the support is not overwhelming. I mean, 70% is a lot, but it's not complete. It's not like some other countries we've seen. What narrative can you give people in order not to remain in the status quo, but take the chance and actually join? Because I suppose some people are also scared. Right? They would be scared of the new, and they would be scared of offending a powerful neighbor.
Well, if we're still on a day when we're celebrating the 2004 enlargement, I'll just tell you where we were in 2004, which was actually only 2 decades ago. I was still a student at the same time, and I was frequently going to international student conferences, seminars, trainings, while having to stay hours in line to get your visa, really find the funding to buy a very expensive ticket. At that time, there were no cheap tickets. You had to present your utility bills for the last 6 months to show you are a responsible citizen who's going to return back from the EU home to continue doing what you were doing. And every young person today who is involved in, in public administration today remembers very well these days. In the last 2 decades, we've managed to politically and economically come much closer to the EU. Now 70% of our exports, almost 70% of our exports are towards the European market. We can freely visit the EU. We have cheap airlines traveling to, coming to Chisinau. And people really appreciate this freedom and liberty to travel, to get to know other countries, other cultures, other people. So it's not difficult to sell European Union to Moldovans, but we live in a very unique geopolitical situation today, which was very different from 2004. And that is the threat coming from a revisionist country that does not respect sovereignty, territorial integrity, or independence of their neighbors, and that really creates strong uncertainty whether we are safe. So again, the European Union today, foremost for Moldovans, is a project of peace. We look towards the European Union as a space that can provide that security and that respect, not only for democracy, rule of law, but for your territorial integrity of the country. So here I would say 70% is not little. 70% for a country like Moldova, which is very diverse ethnically, linguistically, is actually a lot. And we will continue trying to increase that number even further.
Mr.
Telička, you wanted to?
Yeah, just 3 remarks on what has been said. I'll start with really the last topic. I very much agree, 70% is a lot, honestly. The task for me would be how to maintain the 70% and how to make it solid, that it's not superficial the moment the first difficult issues in the transition in the negotiations will arise. Then it can start dropping, but I mean 70%, I think we would love to have had 70% in the first years of accession. Unfortunately, like it or not, at least if I would speak for the Czech Republic, it's nearly impossible to do anything with the 30%. Yeah, I mean, we have that problem, and that's where we have today the support for the populist parties, for the extreme parties. It's a matter of fact. It is difficult. You need to work with them. You can't throw them overboard, but it is difficult to achieve, I mean, an increase. There's a role for us to play. I mean, we can be the ones that will help with, not intervene in the domestic debate, political or public, but the ones to provide our experience, our people, our knowledge, our, let's say, comments without really being interventionist and being then a good excuse for the opposition. But there's a lot that we can say. And I think that there's a lot of experience that we also have with, it's not just Ukraine, with your eastern neighbor. Which brings me to the second remark I wanted to make. A lot has been said about the chapters on the rule of law. We had that, now I agree it's differently structured. I think it's more a question of technicality than a real substantial difference. We had that, we have our experience joined. I see some former colleagues from the Austrian side. We had our Banish decrees, we had our Temelin plant, you know, and we had to perform, we had to show where we implement, and vice versa. So it's been there. But there is one issue which has not been mentioned and which would concern me, and I think would concern the Czechs, and that is the penetration of those that are today openly, fiercely attacking in hybrid and in different ways our system, our societies, our safety, our security. And I think we will be looking at the new candidate countries and the future member states, to what extent this business economic environment is penetrated by something that we had to face, we face today, but where the real concern, not just security like in general, or safety, but question of lives concern will really be looked into. I mean, you can read today in the Kremlin internal papers the preparation for concrete, let's say, attacks in the European Union. And of course, this will be done also through the influence that you may find in business. So this is extremely important, and this is something that I say openly, we will be looking at what is the threat. Because today, Cybersecurity Act, Cyber Resilience Act, name it, I mean, there are complete obligations. It is a common space, and we will want to see how strong we will be with the new member states. And we will be as strong or as weak as the weakest part of the chain. This is nothing to do with your two countries. It's just a general comment because I felt that we were missing on that. I've got a third comment about a third issue, but I have spoken maybe for far too long now. I'll wait and I'll link it with something else later on. Thank you.
Anyone want to add to that? Otherwise, I would like to talk about reforms because I think there's potential debate in there, and we do want to take time for that. So Europe is strongest when it speaks with one voice. And we've seen that it's very hard to make decisions. Lots of things can't be done unanimously. We see that now, and thinking of a European Union that has 35 member states, there is the question of how are we going to find decisions. So there has been calls for reforms, and they're getting louder. So there's demands for simplification, for an end to anonymous decisions in the Council, for a reduction of the European Parliament and of the European Commission. So I'm going to start with you, Professor Stainer-Hämmerle. Is there appetite for this in Austria, do you think?
Yes, as a small country, of course, we don't like to have more decisions taken by a majority. or to make a smaller commission because we fear that we have no commissioner then anymore, or not all the time. So this is, I think, but the debate in every country, but the bigger ones, they have more voices. They of course, they have another also basis of their power. But I would like to come back to the 5 scenarios Jean-Claude Juncker introduced 2017, and unfortunately the discussion stuck because of, we know then there was the pandemic and the war and all the other problems, but we have these 5 scenarios, like carrying on or muddling through. Someone also called that scenario. Nothing but the single market, which would be the economic only the economic perspective. Those who want more to do more.
Core European Union.
The core of the Union, yes. Doing less more efficiently and doing much more together. So doing less more efficiently, of course, is now the official position of the Austrian government. But we don't know who will rule the country next year. As you know, we have national elections in September. We have one party, at least in the front of the polls. So we don't know if we have probably right-wing populists who are not for an exit, really, but who will not support the deepening and also not the enlargement of the European Union in Austria. And this is also the problem for, I think, all the negotiations, that you have always changing partners on the other side at the member states. So I cannot guarantee. I can say now, okay, we are for the enlargement with the Western Balkan states, not Turkey. I think there's no way for Turkey in Austria to get the political or also a majority.
Talks have stopped anyway.
Yeah, so I'm also skeptical with the Ukraine, but of course we support the Western Balkan states, or the government support it. But if we have a political change, we cannot guarantee if this position will be the same. And of course, this is connected with the position also, so doing less more efficiently in Austria at the moment and not doing much more together. So it's always the question between getting bigger or getting deeper in the European Union. And I agree with your position that 2004 there were all the changes of the construction of the procedures and also the willingness to change all this in the European Union. And I think now we have too many veto players for such processes. Yes, because if you need a big change, you have referendums. You need the all the member states, all the parliaments. So I don't know if 27 partners will get that.
Mr. Mrak.
I know very well these 5 scenarios. I think if they will be written today, I think they will be very different. I think 2017 was a pretty normal kind of, okay, we were out of the crisis and so on, so it was very much looking about how EU to restructure, but it was done pretty much, I would say, on the economic grounds. I think we are in my view, the EU is in a completely different situation. You know, what's going on with these issues of the geopolitics, what's going on with the global economic governance in general. I think Europe stands at a very important juncture, whether we will really stick together or not. I know that it's a little bit difficult question, but the issues, for example, of the if you compare US, China, and Europe, this what is going on globally has a much more negative impact on EU. Just let me give you a few things. Europe is much more open to the rest of the world than the other 2 economic powers. And of course, if these things are going on in this changed global environment, it's logical that you are in relative terms more negatively affected. The same thing can be said for the foreign investments. And the third thing was that the Europe was traditionally, over the decades, nourishing the common market and the common foreign trade, of course, it's a customs union. But the point is that that was basically during the process of the decades of the globalization. We have pretty much opened our internal market. We had a very strict competition policy, state aid policies, but Europe was, in my view, very well equipped to the global economic governments where the rules of the game were relatively clear. Now the world is getting much and much into the type of, from rule-based to a kind of a deal-based type of global economy, where the big players, play differently than they used to be. And if Europe will not adjust to this, and then of course that would require some very tough decisions, then of course I will refer to one saying which was said 2 years ago in one of our conferences in Bled, that if Europe will not basically, that over the next 5 years, 10 years, it will be basically, seen, it will be basically clear whether Europe will be at the table or it will be on the table.
But how? How do we?
No, that's what I'm saying. So if we want to be at the table, then I think we will have to change some of our existing policies substantially. Are we ready to do so? I'm not so sure, hearing what we are having here. But then we cannot be surprised that the things will go in a different way. The issue of the state aids. We are those one who follow the things, what's going on with the car industry these days. You have a completely opposing views about what to do in the car industry vis-a-vis China, of the two major, let's say the largest. German position here, completely different than the French position. So we will have much more discussions on how to set our internal house to be ready for these adjustments. We have done pretty well the COVID crisis. The reaction for the COVID crisis was very quick on the EU level to those things what the EU can do. The situation for the energy crisis was a little bit already different, much more delays. Why? Because also the positions of individual countries are very, very different. So I really hope that, like we have in the past, during the financial crisis, when the difficult decisions were made, when the water was coming to here. If you remember, the Eurozone was basically put in place in Maastricht, relatively shaky. It was reformed in 2013, and today the Eurozone is much more robust than it was 10 years ago. I do hope that we are facing similar type, but not of an economic crisis, of some other crisis, and I hope that in 10 years we will be able to say that we had adjust to these things, and one of the things here will be also this decision-making. I know that will be, it's interesting, we have elections in 1 month. There's no discussion in Slovenia on the EU issues. We are talking about, the health reform, which is of course now our problem, but doesn't have much with the EU elections. What is our position on the qualified majority on foreign security policy? Is there any position? Is there any position on what was said here on the Commission changes? We have in the Lisbon Treaty that that basically 2/3 of the member states and so on. Now, if we go to enlargement, that will become again more in the table. We have now the Parliament. It's pretty sure. I'm not, but just reading that the Parliament will be more dispersed than it is now. What means more coalition partners, and as I know from Slovenia, more coalition partners you have, more messy are the results. Higher is the price for this. So I do hope that these elections, and here I would really plead to this, that we would really have as high as voting people really vote where we will go in the next few years, because maybe then the next elections will be already could be quite different ones.
Maybe one last round of questions, because we do want to take questions from the audience in a minute. So, Mr. Telička, you have seen the European institutions from the inside. You were a member of the European Parliament, you were Vice President of the European Parliament, and you were also your country's first commissioner. What is your position on the reforms? Do we need them? What do we need?
Well, yes, we need them, and the question is when and how can we really achieve those? So if you would ask me, and I do not represent the Czech official positions. I think that there is very little debate like in Slovenia. There are those like the president that probably would go further like me. The government, for some reasons, is somewhat more cautious. But absolutely, if we want to have an efficient functioning European Union, and I don't buy the argument of the small state. I mean, you can tackle it, but you need more efficient decision making. You need less of administrative burden. You need less bureaucracy. Everyone speaks about it, but when I was in the parliament and came with an initiative of reducing administrative burden, there was little support across the political spectrum. When I raised it with Secretary General of the Council, that also the Council should be measuring the impact of the legislation that is enacted on businesses and on public, no, we won't be doing it. Yeah, so it's like scissors between what you need and what is the reality. So yes, I cannot imagine a commission of 35, 32, whatever the number is, unless you create artificial portfolios, unless you create commissioners that really matter. And already today it is, sorry to be on the soil of the House of the European Union, but this commission is very centralized. And the weight of the different commissioners is different, and partly it may have also that institutional aspect. So qualified majority voting, yes, I mean, can you imagine another crisis and you would wait, whether it's COVID, whether it's energy, whatever, you would wait before you will decide? Migration pact was blocked in the council. It was in the council, nowhere else. I mean, we can have some critical remarks towards it, but there is a number of very useful instruments there to tackle migration. It was on waiting. You know, it was like a substitute somewhere. You play sports and it was on the bench. So, I mean, we cannot afford it. The next crisis can be even more severe. It can be moral security, safety, life affecting. So we need to tackle it. But the question is, can we do it now in the shape and in the condition in which we are?
Everyone would have to agree,
Can we link it with enlargement? I mean, then say goodbye to enlargement. Yeah, it's not taking place. If you make it conditional, it will just not happen. I mean, we need to build on it. We need to prepare, but it's not a question of tomorrow. For a final remark, Jean-Claude Juncker knows me very well, so he would be sitting here. He would be not surprised by what I'm going to say about his 5 scenarios. I think it was insufficient. It was inconcrete. It was some of them unrealistic. It was wrong timing, and this is not the way to go. You don't have in this union the ability to go. What you need to do is to identify the bottlenecks, the real issues, the problems, and see how efficiently you can deal with them on national or EU basis. You need a debate so that the public would understand. If a member state would put it to a plebiscite, to a referendum, that you would stand a chance. This is the way to proceed. I mean, to really identify across the spectrum what needs to be addressed. And a really very final remark. I agree with my Slovenian colleague said on state aid, really. I mean, but I would still plead to be liberal, to try to impose the regulatory environment on the rest, and we need to work differently with the Americans. Yeah, I mean, we have resigned on working on it. We might even see some fines in autumn on some of the US companies just to show that DMA works, and that we can bring really Trump to the office. Yeah, it's going to be like a sign of a trade war. We need to think strategically. But there's one issue that has not been mentioned. We will be more competitive. We will be stronger politically, economically, if we will do the right decisions in terms of competitiveness, innovation. I mean, where do the financial means go? How innovative are we? We're going to set up a startup here today. What are we going to do? We're going to end up in Silicon Valley. We won't have the money to support it. We don't have integrated capital markets. There will be very few business people that will go into that risk. You will find plenty of those at Silicon Valley or somewhere close to Redmond or Seattle, whatever. So there's a lot that needs to be changed, and maybe you don't even need a qualified majority voting. You just need the right focus, the right issues, the courage to deliver on those, and stop playing silly games.
Thank you. Is there anything to add? Otherwise, I would open the debate now. I would.
It was too Czech.
Anything? Any remarks from the outsider, from people who are not yet part of it?
So far, it's not our business, huh?
Yes.
Even though it might be actually business of Montenegro very soon, but frankly speaking, as a political scientist, I think this is probably the feeling and the special place of the idea of sovereignty that many states and how the states perceive it, but also the way and the manifestations of another idea, which is not so contrary to the idea of sovereignty, and actually one of the streams was born in this city, the idea of federalism. So these two ideas, can be conflicting, but can find some kind of a resolution. I think that the European Union has to be more compact for the new world in order to stand for the fundamental values it is based on. It simply needs to be more effective as a political system, as a policy. And in that regard, I also believe that some of these reforms need to take place in order to unblock the system and to make it efficient for the many challenges that this continent will face.
But there is no real debate about it. It must be frustrating from your perspective, Ms. Gherasimov, to see it's not really debated here.
Well, I think it's more discussed than 5-10 years ago. I think also the discussion, the revived discussion on enlargement somehow has brought more attention also to the importance of internal EU reform. I just hope these will be parallel processes, not one a precondition for the other. But I will be very short what I want in my remarks on this question. I just wanted to say that the way we see it from Moldova and beyond the EU, the strength of the European Union really lies in its unity. The union is strongest when you speak with one voice. The moment you start having different opinions, if you want to make European Union weak, make it fragmented. And internal reform is one of these topics where you're fragmented as a community of states. And it's unfortunate that only moments of crisis bring that unity. I mean, we've seen the speed with COVID, we've seen the speed with energy crisis, we've seen the speed that the European Union can have with mobilizing support for Ukraine in the first weeks and months. So it is possible, but unfortunately it's possible only in crises to become more efficient at decision making. So with how quickly we're moving to a multipolar world, I think, yes, we can still continue debating how to do the reform, the internal reform, but then, as someone said here on the panel, then we will be on the table, not at the table.
Just one sentence. Federalism, maybe going to substance, you would learn that I'm a federalist, but I would skip the word. I would skip the debate on that. Reform, I would be tempted to skip the word reform. Yeah, because you don't have even some DNA in some member states for reform, but you can do, as I say, step by step, in effect, introduce the changes. It's like with Green Deal. Believe me, Green Deal, as legitimate as it is, in a year or so will not be called Green Deal. Yeah, because people are irritated by the words. It's going to be there. I'm telling the opponents, Green Deal is there, will be maybe with some changes, but there will be an industrial dimension. But in order to please the conservative politicians, we will not call it, we will not mention the Green Deal. And that, unfortunately, is the way to proceed. Sorry, it was more than one sentence, I admit.
A little more than one. So I would like to open up now. I'm sure there's questions from the audience or remarks. If there's remarks, I do ask you to keep them relatively short. We've got another couple of minutes. We've got someone walking around with a microphone. Sir, in the front there, the fourth row, fifth row was first, and then lady in the back.
Thank you. I worked in DG enlargement during the Big Bang enlargement, and Mr. Mrak was saying that the Commission at the time was very strong. And just to the mechanisms, I mean, we had the annual reports and progress reports, we had committees, we went there, sectoral committees, we pushed countries to align and to increase their administrative capacity. And even these days, my counterparts, mainly in Lithuania, are still very pleased that we kicked them to do that. And then that allowed us to turn around and say, well, then when you do this, or I don't know, you set up a regulatory authority with this and that capacity, we'll turn to the member states and we will advocate for you. Because the accession process as such, as Mr. Telička was saying, was very ceremonial when it came to the top political level, but the footwork. And we had the big FAR program, and we invented new things like twinning, and we moved the management of FAR from centralized to the member states in preparation for the structural funds. And all this sort of stuff. When I was in Brussels this January, I noticed that all my colleagues who had gathered this experience in doing the accession negotiations have retired or they've gone away and they're doing something else. And DG NEAR is by far not near to what DG Enlargement was at the time. So my question is, the new commission will come in after the elections. Obviously, there's more emphasis on security. There's more emphasis on competitiveness. As Mr. Telička says, the green will not go away. But do you see any pressure, and I hope you will, if you don't see it, you'll make one, that there should be a strong enlargement commissioner and that there should be a strong enlargement commission mechanism with good people dealing with that if you want the enlargement with the Western Balkans, with Moldova and with Ukraine to happen?
Anybody in particular you're asking? Or Mr. Mrak?
Because I've lost contact with what's going on nowadays.
Mr. Edina has difficulties to find the names for us.
Maybe.
Joking.
Maybe you want to start.
A little bit of a comment. Yeah, I mean, just one thing. If you look the medium-term financial framework for the period 2000-2006, you have usually in these 6-7 priorities of the EU for the next 7 years period. At that time, enlargement was one of the 6. So it was clear that enlargement is a policy priority for the Commission, if you want, and with this also for the EU member states. Later on, the enlargement was basically drawn down in this neighboring and enlargement, so it was still there, but it was not visible. And to be very frank, I think at that time, officials in the DG enlargements were really top officials. I'm talking professionally. The enlargement was very interesting DG within the Commission. It has not been over the recent years, unfortunately. You had a lot of changing of the people in the enlargement. Whenever they get another job in another day, they went there. So it was, what I want to say, internally, it was the enlargement was not kind of very high on the agenda. I do hope that if we are serious about the enlargement, that we will have in the next commission a commissioner on enlargement, even if this is this number of them, and that of course that the enlargement will really get also institutionally different position that it has over the last 2 medium-term financial perspectives and these decades. If you remember, I think it was Juncker. I mean, if going with the word at the beginning of his term, there will be no enlargement during my 5 years. I mean, even if he knows that that will not be the case, if you say this, you are making a very clear expectations for everybody. So I should not talk about the enlargement because this is not a priority for my commission. So I hope now with these developments over the recent years that enlargement will also be reflected in these things over the new commission.
We only have about 5 minutes left.
Very, very legitimate remarks of both gentlemen. My question is, which candidate for a commissioner throughout the EU is today saying, I would like to have the enlargement portfolio? I know of nobody. That is a very unfortunate sign. And that also means that the portfolio most likely will be left to someone that was not really absolutely keen and maybe one of the less of heavyweights. But this is the time, and if I were a candidate country, and I would try to intervene with the member states to make sure that at a time when the new president designated will be the distributed portfolios, that this will be an issue. You have a good chance because with all respect to all the countries, you have Ukraine among you, and this is for many a big issue, a big headache, a big opportunity at the same time. I'm very much in favor of Ukraine's accession. That's also the time to implant it in the European Parliament. You will have hearings, you will have negotiations, so on. That's the time you can build up a little bit of demand for a commissioner with a bigger name for enlargement, and that person, if he or she is wise enough, will try to rebuild the DG, will try to get the right people from different DGs. But this is a process, and we are just a few weeks away from the European elections. We are a few months away from the new European Commission, and it's not on the agenda. So the likelihood that that will happen is unfortunately low. But this is the time really to act even on that rather strategic issue.
Thank you. There was one more question.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sopo. I'm from Georgia, and I study political science at the University of Vienna. My question is about the protests in Tbilisi. And what do you think about what's going in Georgia now, and what's the solution? Thank you very much.
Who are you asking?
All of them.
Who feels obliged to answer to this very hard question? Anybody? I think it's...
Okay, well, I'll be blunt. If I could, I would be on the streets. I would be joining those campaigning, because this is exactly the issue that I had in mind a few minutes ago when I said that we will be looking at the candidate countries, how the environment, the business environment, the society, the politics are penetrated with interests which are completely not in line with our interests, and in fact are one of, and I'm sorry to say so, at the moment of an enemy. Yeah, this is how they behave. So this is key, and I think that we are really looking at Georgia at the moment, and hopefully things will turn out that the influence of Russia will be decreasing, and we will see a straightforward course of Georgia. We would love that, we Czechs, but it's really up to you.
I'm afraid I have to make a point here and say there might be, or there will be opportunity to ask more questions outside. We're going to get fed. We're going to get drinks, but I'm going to hand over Mr. Bogensberger now. I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you very much for the debate, and see you outside.
Thank you very much as well from my side for this highly interesting, rational, sober, sometimes highly emotional discussion with lots of insights, with much detailed knowledge on the long, challenging and demanding journey of enlargement. This was highly interesting from all and several aspects, so many thanks to you, Shibon. I got it now. And to the participants of the panel, Mojmir Mrak, Kathrin Stainer-Hämmerle, Pavel Telička, Cristina Gherasimov, and Predrag Senovic. We will now hear, as a concluding moment, music again from our wonderful Cypriotic music group, and this will be a hymn medley connecting the countries connecting all the celebrating countries here, arranged by Cristina Thalasinu. Is this more or less as it should be? Okay, many thanks. So as this is a combination of anthems, I would like to ask you to stand up, and afterwards please join the dishes offered by the 10 celebrating countries. Many thanks.